I do that every once in a while. Blows your mind.
What do you mean there's different versions?
My name is
What's
Matt
this?
Hendrickson. I am the U.S. History teacher at Central High School. This is for my first video observation for my practicum, presenting a professional development video. I'm happy to have with us the members of Central High School staff who have graciously volunteered their time to be my audience, and also my guinea pigs too. So this will be for Dr. Floyd, and this is also for part of my PASL requirements as well. All right, so we're going to get started off today. So one of the things that we are doing as part of the All In movement and initiative here at Central is we are reading from the book, The Fundamental Five. And so Mr. Garza talked a little bit about it. And so what we're going to be talking about today is one of those segments in the Fundamental Five, and we're going to be talking about frequent, small group, purposeful talk. So the idea is we're going to talk about what are some of the elements that we need for this. Also, we're going to talk about some of the advantages, and then some of the things that we're also going to have to look out for. So the one thing that we are going to do today is, as part of this, just so that we can get an experience, we are going to conduct this professional development training just like we would in class, and using this professional small group purposeful talk, or what they call FSGPT. So I'll try not to get too technical with the definitions today. So first of all, we want to recap a couple of things that we have already picked up in the book. First of all, the first part talks about framing the lesson, and this includes the use of I will and we will adjectives when we are putting down our objectives on the board. So in terms of we will, we are going to talk about what we are going to learn in class, and then for the I will, we're going to find out how each student is going to apply the knowledge that they learned in class. So that's going to be the first thing that we have discussed in the book, is this use of I will and we will. And so what we're going to do with this is we want to make sure that we're utilizing all of Bloom's taxonomy. So we're going from the lower order thinking all the way up to the higher order thinking too. So that's going to be the first part. So the second part in the book is also the power zone. And so what we're doing is teaching or monitoring close to our students. Instead of just standing up here, we're getting close to the students, we're getting close to the groups. So basically why we're doing this is so that we can identify any changes that are going on in their learning. If somebody's not getting it, we can stop and intervene to help them so that they do understand it. Also, it's a good way of making sure that the students are behaving themselves. So this is also a management tool as well, so that way we make sure that they simply aren't just goofing around, playing on their phones, or looking at websites they shouldn't be looking at, like ESPN. So this is also a good way of easily conducting formative assessment as well. So you can see, are the kids getting it? Are they filling out their notes? Are they having any issues? Do they look confused? Kind of that deer in headlights look that I sometimes feel like every morning when I come to school. So in any case, that's the idea behind the power zone. So those are the two recaps. So that also helps to make sure that on-task behavior is improved. Also off-task behavior and disciplinary issues start to decrease too. So this is a very effective management tool, as Mr. Garza has mentioned many times. So we've all had those classes where we are talking about a topic, we are demonstrating a topic, and this happens in our class.
In 1930, the Republican-controlled House of Representatives, in an effort to alleviate the effects of the, anyone, the Great Depression, passed the, anyone, the tariff bill, the Hawley-Smoot Tariff Act, which, anyone raised or lowered, raised tariffs in an effort to collect more revenue for the federal government. Did it work? Anyone? Anyone know the effects? It did not work, and the United States sank deeper into the Great Depression. Today, we have a similar debate over this. Anyone know what this is, class? Anyone? Anyone? Anyone seen this before? the Laffer curve. Anyone know what this says? It says that at this point on the revenue curve, you will get exactly the same amount of revenue as at this point. This is very controversial. Does anyone know what Vice President Bush called this in 1980? Anyone? Something DOO economics. Voodoo economics.
Okay, how many of us have had that happen? Has that happened to?
Yeah.
I'll be the first to admit this. Okay? By the way, that is the great Ben Stein. He was actually, before he became an actor, he was actually a speechwriter for Richard Nixon.
He's an economist.
Yes, he is. So he knows exactly what so he's done pretty much everything. He's what I like to call a polymath. He's pretty much a master of all trades and pretty much about it. So, what I want you to do is, with your partner or in your group, what I would like you to do is discuss a couple of things. So first of all, what issues did you see in the video? Which elements of the fundamental five, so the two that we're talking about already, which ones do you see are missing, if any? And then what management issues is this economics teacher facing? So I want you to take about 2 minutes to do that. If you get done a little bit early, we'll talk about it.
Non-relatable, it's non-relatable. There's no time allowed for an actual answer. He doesn't do any writing. They're not tuned in.
He's not engaging
No.
with kids.
No.
That's one element of the time. He's not, engaging the kids.
What was the focus of the lesson? Well, he started the lesson, so we would have seen the focus first, not that one.
I think something about the Great Depression.
Yeah, of course,
What management
But
issues?
it's, well, was it actually economics or was it
Well,
history?
Yeah, very big public. I would probably be there with
No,
a
he stood
wet
there at
light
the
and
table,
say,
blocking, no, he had the front desk,
clean
and
that
back and forth.
He's making me want to do one too.
Yeah, I know, I love it anyway. I cried.
or give them
I cried
some
about it,
antiseptic
man.
wipes.
Yeah,
That's
I
the
gotta
next
pull it
one.
out, man. I get some answers. Well, it works. You can get it for free.
I've had that type in
Yeah.
college, right after lunch.
I would probably go with that sleeping student. I'd probably give them a wet wipe and say, here you go, son, why don't you clean this up?
At some point, like, especially in
Well,
today's
at the end of
world,
class,
a
yeah,
lot of
you
people
want to
do
do
things
the
like that.
class.
Right.
The more likely you're gonna have a student
Right.
pretty much
He'll already be snoring if he's drilling.
And that
Mm.
could really
Yeah.
start.
I remember one time I was in a government class at SDSU, and this was at 8:30 in the morning, and you never take a class
Have
before
you
9.
been out? One of my
And I
friends
remember
said,
one time, and it was very warm, it was
my
in
line
the
now is
animal
when you
science
get out of
building,
high school.
and
I just flat tell
it
them,
got very
remember
warm
that.
there, and
I
I
said,
was
all
very
you gotta
tired,
do is
and so a
graduate.
couple of times I actually caught myself
One of my
snoring.
kids
And that
thought
they
that
don't
they
fire
were-
out the question.
Well, absolutely.
lost.
But,
I had no
you know,
signal.
she was basically on her last leg, she was getting ready to retire after that.
Yes.
So,
Finally.
pretty much, it was just what the military calls retired on active duty.
Yeah.
They're ready to be entertained, and then you see that.
I need that to.
My kids love this, by the way.
That sounded like you.
So, the first question that I have is, what issues did you see in this video? Whoops.
Well, he's not engaging the students.
Not engaging the students.
He's not giving them time to answer his question.
Yeah.
He's
Not
famously
relatable.
monotone.
Mm-hmm,
Not relatable, he's not moving off of the board.
mm-hmm.
Yeah,
They're
he's
so
not
used to
even-
being entertained on what they do in today's world, just sitting there listening to somebody else talk is not gonna go well.
Yeah, he's not
Okay.
relating it to it, cause like with a lot of things, especially like economics or a lot of social studies stuff, or anything really, you gotta have to relate it to the kids, otherwise they're just gonna check out instantly on you.
Absolutely. Okay, so let's look at we talked very briefly about the other elements of the fundamental five. So what were some of the things that we saw were definitely missing?
Power zone.
Yeah, powers, he's not in his power, the power zone.
Mm-hmm. Because he's basically attached to the chalkboard,
Mhm.
right? So,
He could have grouped the kids and give them, you know, like the smooth, or whatever he's talking about, the smooth act or whatever.
mhm.
There was nothing for the students to be doing, other than I guess taking notes, but it was all just him.
Mhm.
Yeah.
There's no I will.
So in other words, this is very much a teacher-focused. This is a teacher-centered class, correct?
Yeah.
So what kind of management issues are we talking about? What could this teacher be facing as a result of having these kids basically zoning off?
Essentially 25 puddles of drool on their desk.
25 puddles of drool,
Well, if
absolutely.
he kept talking and they all go to sleep, and he wouldn't have a management program because it's problem, because they'd all
That
talk
may be
out.
the- that may be the goal.
There wouldn't be no management problem, they'd all be asleep
They're
after
asleep,
a
they
little
can't
bit.
talk.
Absolutely. So we see that there are some management issues that could develop. One of the other things that I do see as a consequence is that the kids aren't learning anything. They're zoning out. They're basically doodling, or they're sleeping, or they're just like, and that's it. So obviously there's got to be a better way to engage these kids. And so what the book talks about, the Fundamental Five, what they talk about is engaging is what is called frequent small group purposeful talk. Basically, each student has a mini discussion, or each group has their own little mini discussions. And so what this does is you present a seed question, okay? And so it's related to the lesson at hand. And so what those students do is these seed questions are presented after either 10 to 15 minutes of teacher-driven instruction, or once you get done with a major instructional concept. So the thing is, you want to go whichever is first. So if you're tackling a big major concept that's going to take the whole class period, you want to take about 10 to 15 minutes. And Ms. Johnson, one thing that you mentioned last week was that when you are talking and giving a lesson, when you're talking to the students and giving a lecture, you only want to average about 1 minute per age, or per year of age. So for example, if we have
That's being
16-year-old
generous.
kids, 16 minutes, but let's face it,
It's closer to 10.
closer to about 10. So you want to make sure you include those breaks so that they have this opportunity to talk. So that's the idea behind this frequent small group purposeful talk. And so what happens is when they do talk, they talk anywhere from 30 seconds to 3 minutes. So basically you're looking at, are you trying to recap knowledge? Or are you trying to get them to get into some higher order thinking? So if you're getting them into higher order thinking, you want to give them more time to be able to draw this out. But if it's something that's just a quick recall, just a quick remember, then give them 30 seconds to a minute. So, then after the small group discussion, what happens is we take a few moments and we discuss it. We check for understanding. So we ask each group, so what did you think was the purpose behind the Great Society? And so they would have to discuss that, and then you come back and then you ask each group. So you want to check for understanding. So when we look at FSGP, we want to look at 4 different structures. The first structure is frequency. We also want to look at group size. We also want to take into consideration the seed question. That's going to be very important. And finally, we want to discuss the power zone as well. So those are the 4 structures that we're going to do when we engage in FSGP talk. So we take a look at frequency, and what you have to do is when you're putting together your lesson, you have to put together that time so that you can manage student discussion. And so you have to plan out the questions, you have to plan out when your breaks are going to be. And so, like we said before, 10 to 15 minutes of teacher talk, of course with our kids, probably closer to about 10 minutes. And so you're either switching off to another activity, you know, it's not necessarily something that you just have to use for lecture, but if you're doing a demonstration, or if you're modeling, or if you're having the kids work together on a project, give them about 10 minutes, because that's about how long their attention span lasts. So we also want to look at group size. So when we're discussing things, you need at least 2 groups, because unless you're a ventriloquist, it's very, very difficult to have a conversation by yourself, unless you have a little puppet with you. But you can't get it too big, okay? So if you have over 4 students per group, you're gonna find 2 issues take place. So the first issue is that some students are gonna get left out of the discussion. And we all know who those students are. They are the ones that are simply going to sit back in the background. They're not going to say anything and let everybody else discuss it. So if we have more than 4 people in a group, that's what tends to happen. The other thing that happens too, side conversations. So next thing you know, you've got a couple of people, you say you have 6 people in a group, 4 of them are discussing the topic, 2 others are talking about the baseball game, or maybe they're talking about what's coming up for spring break. So that's why you want to make sure that those groups are no larger than 4. 2, 3, or 4 students is about perfect. And then we have to look at the seed question as well. So that's the next structure that we have to look at. So the seed question has to be pre-planned, okay? So this is not something that you can just do off the top of your head, because if you do that, you're not going to get the depth of knowledge that you really want to get from your students. Basically, all you're going to do is, it's going to be a recall, okay? But you want to try to get some more of that understanding. So you have to plan out those seed questions. And so what that also does too is when you plan out the seed questions, it helps guide the conversation. So in other words, it's not just something that you ask off the top of your head, and if the students see that, they're going to think, oh, Mr. Hendrickson's just pulling stuff out of thin air. So you have to make sure that you're confident when you give that seed question. It also keeps students focused on the content. So all the seed questions have to be tied back into what we have learned. And we want them to try to build on that. And it also allows the teacher to help understand the level of understanding. So we're talking about formative assessment here. So we can see how the students are developing, how they're understanding, and how they're incorporating what has been learned into higher order thinking. So that's the purpose behind the seed question. And then the last thing that Mr. Garza is such a champion about is the power zone. It's amazing what you can find on Google. So what this does is it makes sure that as you get closer to these groups, it helps them to remember that, hey, we have to be focused here. So Mr. Hendrickson is not simply just off doing something else or checking email. He's basically right there involved, interested in what you're doing, and making sure that you're also staying on task. So it also allows for listening for misunderstandings. So let's say, for example, that we have Mr. Spray and we also have Mrs. Reed talking, and something comes up that you know is wrong, is incorrect. That gives you a chance to intervene and say, you might want to look at it this way. Or it can be something that you can bring up when you go back into regular instruction. So you can address it immediately, or you can also address it during the next teacher talk session. So that's the nice thing about using the power zone, especially when you're using this frequent small group and purposeful talk. So we took a look at the 4. So what I want you to do is, as you remember those last 4, I want you to discuss with your partner, I want you to evaluate what do you think is the most important structure of the frequent small group and purposeful talk. So we'll take a few minutes to do this, so if we go less than 3 minutes, that's fine.
I'll be that student.
Good job, that's good.
And go and sit over here.
I could go.
Or
I'll
math.
try to
I like it better when you're.
I meant when it's more longer.
Any group work I do with,
Basically, the things about
they're gonna come in and fix them.
I like the group thing.
And they,
That's probably the most important thing, other than group moving. You don't move
Change up
around.
the groups.
Yeah, just move yourself around.
Oh, yeah.
They're the back there, they're design workers. You just can't always, I mean, for my people, I have a racetrack.
Just
Yeah.
because if you want to like certain things over for too long. then
There's groups, and change them up. No, they always do
Yeah.
the same.
And then when you change up groups, it's kids. But then you gotta
And
make
also
sure
what-
that you're realizing what their capabilities are and what their maxes are, because you can't.
Make sure they're on topic, I guess. Move around, being in your power zone.
Mhm.
Make sure they don't outfit that.
what I've got, it's always worked for me before, it's not so much a group.
So what do you think about the
Have
group
two or
size?
three kids
I
in
think
each
three.
class.
Three?
That's
No
what
more
they
than
all-
four,
Yeah.
and you have to number them
So
all
the
ahead of time,
parents
that
can
not
teach
the same people in the
So
same group every
a lot
time.
Yeah.
part of
Two
it.
do the work, two don't, or two do work, one
The
doesn't.
group
Yeah.
deal, for me.
I like that idea, especially what happens is if they become too familiar with each
Oh,
other.
yeah, they're gonna hook up with their friend, or they're gonna hook up with the smart persons, they do nothing, cause they don't wanna do with it.
Yeah.
And then when they can't figure it out, they come
Definitely,
see me.
if you count how many people you have in that day, you've got 16 people, then you can count 1, 2, 3,
But I
4,
always
1, 2,
said
3,
you
4,
learn
1, 2,
more
3,
from
4, all
teaching
ones
than
get together, all
sitting
twos,
out
all
there
fours.
Yeah.
in the gallery.
And that can't
So with
argue.
those that are
That's a really good point.
helping, yelling, they
We'll
know
bring
how
that
to
up
stuff
when we get
better
into our
because they repeated it themselves.
How you guys doing over here? So there was a really interesting thing about switching up the groups too, and we'll have Mrs. Reed talk a little bit about that too.
Weekend I
So,
went to,
Yeah, you said.
oh, yeah, it was good. Yeah, they're in the process.
so what do you guys think?
Yeah, you said what you said.
It's the most
Hackett.
important thing.
They're packing. I stayed in a hotel room.
Well, that's probably smart.
I went,
Yeah.
when I went back to the house,
Switching up the groups so they don't get
Can't
too
stand chaos.
comfortable with each other.
And
But it
it's
also
just-
helps with the whole,
it's like,
teaching, peer
there's no
teaching.
place for
Mhm.
adults to
And,
go. They're on
idea
TV
you
and
can
teaching, and I'm gonna learn it.
Absolutely, and that's something that we're gonna talk about in our next segment too, so. Good
There's no
job.
place for adults.
No quiet time.
So, looks like everybody's pretty close to being done, and let's face it, we don't want to hear the siren again. So, so I'm going to ask this group over here, what do you think was the most important structure when we were talking about FSGPT?
Oh, y'all are nominating me? Okay. We talked about the small group, portion and how, it's good the smaller the group, and Leah mentioned switching it up so they don't get too comfortable with each other. But also the main thing of peers teaching peers. If you can teach it, you're gonna get a deeper understanding than just listening to the actual teacher lecturing about it.
Absolutely, and I know, Becky, that you came up with something very similar in that want to avoid basically getting groups too familiar, or people in the groups too familiar with each other.
Yeah, I just count them off, wherever they're sitting, I may start at the back, I may start at the front, count the number of kids you have 16, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, ones, ones, 2, 2s, 3, 3s, 3, 4s. Next class, next time I do it, I may start at the back, and that way I end up with different people. Because what happens is in a group of 3, 2 work, 1 doesn't, or vice versa, 1 works, 2 don't. 4, you have 1 work, 3 won't.
Absolutely.
I mean, you know, I get emails that say, Miss Reed, so-and-so didn't do this, and I didn't know. And I'm like, why are you telling me now?
Well, now that you just said that, I just thought of something. You know, some groups work really well together, and some groups don't. So maybe the first time you do group, you see which groups do well and which groups don't, and maybe change up that group that doesn't do too well, like switch. Instead of switching them every time, every day, maybe switch them less often and see which groups, like, okay, John, you go over to this group, Betty, you go over to this group.
Usually I change my groups up like every unit or so, every 6 weeks.
Yeah, I can't see, to me, I don't know, I teach freshmen, so it might be a little different from seniors, but I can't see switching them up every single time.
No.
Oh, no, I don't.
No.
Sometimes I just break them off in quadrants. I may have the
Yeah.
desks pulled together and they put themselves, because sometimes they don't know what I'm gonna do.
Yeah.
And they've learned that. Well, I'm not sure I wanna see it. And they eyeball and figure out where the smart ones go. They
Yeah.
got it down. They go, there's my A kid over there. I'm gonna be next to that desk in case she says something. Oh, you can ask Heather. That's what they'll do. They'll hold off and they'll wait and see and they'll go, what?
I think that's what I would do, just change it up every, just not every single time, but see what works and what doesn't work first.
And I bribe my class. I offer candy for decent answers.
I don't.
And you never know when I'm gonna yank it out. And it's good stuff. It's not garbage, it's good stuff.
What
So
you
they'll
giving
go,
them?
do what?
What you giving them?
Chocolate.
Oh, chocolate girl?
I'm gonna
Okay,
get
we're gonna
sick
start
in your
going to
room.
her class now,
But
I'm
you
just
know,
saying.
I have a class of 17, it's the last period of the day, they've had lunch, they're, doing the drool thing, and so, what happens is, can somebody something, or why would we do X? Somebody gives me a decent answer, I pass them the candy bag, get you one out, and then they're like, well, Miss Reed, also good answer, not good enough. I mean, it's but it works. I mean, and I don't do it all the time, they never know when I'm gonna yank it out of that drawer. So, that
I
maybe
have never tried that.
keep them on their toes. That's the whole thing. If you do the same stuff all the time, then they know. It's like rote learning, same old thing. Move it around, change it up. They don't know what in the world they're gonna do. I took a review sheet for the test grade. I said, do 1 through 35. You can work them into groups. They didn't know what I was gonna do with it. And I said, be careful, you don't know. So they come in, I said, circles 2, 8, 11, 18, 29, 31. I said, that was your quiz, turn it in.
How many deer in the headlights did you get?
They always went, I said, I warned you. And now they've learned, you don't know what Miss Reed's gonna do. And that's what you have to train them to, so that they'll do it, because if not, they go, you gonna use this for a grade? Well, I ain't gonna do anything, I'm gonna copy off my friend. I don't give a lot of worksheet, but it makes sense to do the review. Let them work in groups, pull it.
That is definitely something, and the idea is you want to make sure that you get them thinking about things and not knowing what to expect. They're going to be more likely to remember that information
Or
and
do it.
and to do it as well.
Rather than just go, she ain't gonna take it up.
Right. So, so let's go into the next segment here. So, we're going to talk about what are the advantages of this frequent small group purposeful talk. So, one of the things that we see is translation. So, we use adult speak a lot. Now, we're not talking about adult language like stuff you're going to see on HBO, but we are talking about higher concept words that maybe some students will not understand. Okay, but in those groups, you are going to have those. Or you're going to have those students that are going to be able to understand what you're talking about. And so working together in groups, they're going to have that opportunity as they discuss it. The people who are able to understand the adult talk, they're going to be able to translate that into speech that the others who may not be able to pick up on it right away, they'll be able to translate it into concepts that they can understand. So, we're talking about students teaching each other. Well, this is one way that they can do that, is they can take those concepts and they can translate it into something a little more simple that the other students can understand that might have some difficulty with it. So the other thing is, too, student retention. So what happens when a student doesn't get it? Okay? So you get into those groups and you've got 1 or 2 of the folks that say, yeah, I've got this, no problem. But then you're going to have one of those students that says, I have no idea what he just said, or what she just said. So what that's going to do is, as they get together in these discussion groups, they are going to be able to, number one, those who get it and those who understand can reinforce what they've learned by presenting the material to those who don't get it. Again, talking about that adult talk. So basically we have the students acting as the teacher, as you mentioned before. The other thing, too, is the idea of primacy and recency. So after we instruct the concept, which is the primacy, then the students will get a chance to demonstrate that concept, the recency. So the instruction is when you're giving the discussion or you're giving the lecture. The recency is when the students have to demonstrate what they've learned. So usually what happens in most classes is you see at the beginning of the lesson, they're going to be really receptive. And then, as time goes, their retention starts to drop. And then, when it's time to show what they've learned, whether it's a worksheet, a quiz, or anything like that, then they're going to start paying attention again. They're going to start translating some of that stuff. So what we do here is, instead of just doing the opening and the closing, we're going to do this so that we start with the primacy. We're going to start with the instruction. Then, as it dips down, we're going to have them do that recency. That's where the group discussion comes in. So that means there's not going to be a lag. So you're going to have a lot more retention than if you just started at the beginning and then it goes all the way back to the end. Okay? So that's what we see with the small group discussion. And attention span. Again, Google is great for finding these pictures. So this is really good for students with short attention spans too, because let's face it, not everybody's going to want to sit for 20 or 30 minutes to listen. So when you're doing all this constant change, when you're having them break into their groups, or you break into another activity, that's going to reset that attention span. And so as you keep resetting that attention span, that's going to help them focus more and more on the learning. So that's what we see as an advantage with breaking up that lesson into smaller segments, giving them a chance to discuss it, giving them a chance to apply what they've learned, and then we move on to the next concept. So their attention is always on the lesson. And then at the same time, again, we talk about Bloom's taxonomy. With using the smaller group discussion, it allows you to hit some of the higher rigors for Bloom's taxonomy, when we're talking about creating and evaluating and analyzing. And that, again, takes planning, because if you don't have the questions planned out ahead of time, you're only going to hit these targets. You're going to only hit the remember, the understand, and the apply. So as you put together those C questions, keep that in mind, because you want to get them engaged in that higher order of thinking. And so another thing with the small group discussion is that students can bring in familiar examples, and that allows for instructional relevance. Right now, we're working on the civil rights movement. And so if we were to have a discussion about maybe some of the laws against anti-discrimination, somebody could say, yeah, when I was in New Mexico, this happened to me. So they can put this into concepts that they can understand, and it provides relevance. So again, going back to that video with Mr. Stein, he wasn't putting things in terms that the students could understand. But now, when you work together in groups, you can. So, it goes to our second C question. So, take about 2 minutes with your partners, and I want you to ask, what is the relationship between constant change in activity and engaging students with short attention spans? So I'll give you about 2 minutes to discuss that, starting right now.
Well, I go hand in hand.
My kid with a short attention. Stir her up, see if they can get people to agree with, kind of get off task.
The question.
Yeah, it's not so much short attention, they just don't want to do it. So they try to stir up the class, if they can get more
I don't even
attention,
have
talking
anything
back and
about,
forth with them.
maybe
Well, they feel
trying
like they
like this,
bombed
this
the
group's gonna
class.
have this question, this group's gonna have this question.
Depends on who you have.
Short attention.
If you're heavily on one side of that coin, it's tough to do. Don't worry.
I try to apply that in my class, but
I kind of like that idea, mixing it up with that one group having one question.
Especially in science, like the concepts in science.
Yeah, I mean, they're teaching. They would be teaching your group.
And again, we're making it more student-centered, instead of just everybody discussing it and saying, oh yeah, I agree with that, I agree with that. Maybe that gives them an opportunity to think about things that, oh, I hadn't thought of that. Okay, that's really good, I like that. So, what do you guys think?
They don't get a chance to lose it.
You don't get a chance to lose it?
If you keep changing stuff up, they're not gonna have an opportunity to lose their attention because they've constantly got to do something else. So, I mean, that just eliminates your short attention span problem.
Not that I do any looking anymore, but one of the things I remember when I was running and when I was participating in triathlons is something called muscle cohesion.
I'm not going anywhere.
And that the idea was, in order to maximize your potential, maximize your strength, what you want to do is basically mix things up. And that weird, because if you keep doing the same thing over and over again, you're not going to get used to,
Well, I haven't seen
it's going
it. I mean, I
to
think
get
it's
locked in,
14 days.
so it becomes muscle memory. But if you keep changing it up, then it's going to cause your muscles to react differently. So, okay. So, all right, so when we talk about the constant change in activity, engaging students, so let's go with this group. Becky, what did you guys come to?
Well, every time you change it, they have to refire up the brain cell.
Okay?
So it goes hand in hand, we think.
Yeah, because I mean, if you're constantly changing it, they don't have the opportunity to lose their attention because
Yeah.
they've got to constantly have to go to the next thing, and you keep them on their toes. So, I mean, if you are constantly changing it, even if it's, 2 or 3 different things in a class period in a 45-minute span, that's still 2 or 3 different times that they're gonna have to wake themselves up at some point and refocus if they lost it to begin with. but if you're changing up enough, then they're not gonna lose it.
And hopefully wipe the drool off their face before it hits the desk.
Yes.
But one thing I thought of too, when they talked about this, about 10 years ago, doesn't look like it now, but I used to participate or compete in triathlons back in South Dakota. And so one of the things that they do is something called muscle confusion. So you're not doing the same routine over and over again because your body gets used to it and you never improve your performance. So you're always mixing up your activities. So one day you're on a 5-mile run, next day you're biking 20 miles, or next day you're lifting weights. You're always trying to keep your muscles guessing as to what they're doing so they're always performing at maximum efficiency. And I think by doing this, by constantly changing the activity, by including that discussion, that's where we see that kind of brain confusion going on so that basically they don't get locked into a routine and they're going to end up learning more. So, with that in mind, we do have some points to consider. And yes, we are getting close to the end. So, one point that we want to consider is that as we attempt this, it's not going to be easy, okay? Because the kids are going to be saying, oh gosh, we're going to be able to have free time and talk for 3 minutes in class. So it's going to be really, really important to understand that this is going to be messy. The students are not going to be able to quite understand what's going on. So you have to give yourself a little bit of patience. It's going to be loud. Kids are going to be confused. So you have to make sure that they stay focused. So keeping them focused is going to be very, very crucial. Like I said, student conversation is almost going to be social all the time. They're going to be talking about anything but the topic at hand. When Mr. Krager says, I want you to discuss this, take 2 minutes to discuss this with your partners, at the beginning, they're going to be talking about anything but that concept. They're going to be talking about the game. They're going to be talking about what they saw in Sports Center. They're going to be talking about what their plans are for the weekend. So it's really going to be important that you make sure that you guide them. So that's where that power zone comes in. So you got to make sure that they are remaining focused on the topic at hand. So that's when you go around and you check for understanding. And if they're not talking about that, what you're talking, or the discussion or the topic, you got to make sure that you get them focused. Okay? So it's not going to be easy. So it is going to be messy. The other thing that you also have to take into consideration is you're going to need preparation. So it's going to take a little bit of extra planning to get this put together. So if you do not plan, you're going and you basically shoot off the top of your head, what's going to happen is you're going to end up with closed-ended questions. And those closed-ended questions are going to be in that lower rigor category for Bloom's taxonomy. It's going to be the remembering. It's going to be the recalling. So you need to make sure that when you're planning this out, that you take that time to hit those higher levels. There's also something in the book called Talk Like a Genius. Okay? We might not understand everything, but we can try to talk like a genius. And so we want to hit some of those higher orders questions. So when we look at Bloom's taxonomy, we want to look especially when we go to synthesis and we want to go to evaluation. So that's where you really hit that higher order thinking. And so what we also look at are to present questions like, what would happen if blank? Develop a plan to blank. And what is the relationship between blank? So the idea is you are hitting these. What is the most important? So you're also evaluating too. So make sure that you hit some of those higher order questions. But don't forget some of the easier ones too, because you kind of, again, you want to confuse it, want to mix it up, a little bit of muscle memory, brain memory as it were. So those are some of the major points to consider. So what I want you to do is I want you to take about 3 minutes right now, and I want you to discuss with your partner or with your group a way to incorporate this frequent small group purposeful talk. How are you going to incorporate this into your subject area? So we'll take about 3 minutes to do that.
Well, we're studying cellular
I can't see it.
and fermentation. And I was thinking that
It is.
What if
You
I
want
gave
those,
like,
all of this, because
a word
you
to
can
a group,
easily break
and
up.
they can come up with, you know, what relates to that word. And, or I could ask them like questions
The
about.
first thing you have to do when you put them in a group like that, don't let the buddy system sit together.
Yeah.
You separate one buddy at
Oh,
a
yeah.
word,
You
and
don't give them
let
that power.
and make sure they're with people
How
that
does
don't
this
want to be
work?
around.
Put it in a brown paper bag.
Most times they won't just talk, draw one out, unfortunately, they do.
They can move, that's good.
So, that has to happen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, they do.
I don't know.
We came up with a plan to keep the coronavirus out of the US yesterday. It's here, what do we do to contain it? That was their two big things.
Yeah.
They had come plans.
So is that for economics or for government?
Government,
Okay.
because it's a government response team in a pandemic, so I divided them up and said, here they are, two big toys. Lock them out! That's in my word. Stop all airplanes. It'll work. People have to, well, do video conferencing. I went, there's an idea.
So you're getting to think beyond just the knee-jerk response and
Yeah.
say, what are the
No, you
alternatives?
can't do this. You have to think of all the things that go with it if you make this one decision. What happens?
Okay.
You know, I already use this a lot.
You can't stop travel altogether.
No.
No.
Put them out in the desert, use mobile army surgical hospital. I don't know, we talked about all kinds of stuff. But, you know, I get some thought, because, I mean, this could affect us. We're sending them out on spring break in 2 weeks.
Absolutely, and some of those folks are gonna end up going to, they could end up going to Mexico, or they could end up going to other parts
Going
of
to
the US.
Florida.
Where you're going to see a lot of international people, so what do? All right. So, looks like we're done, or looks like we've wrapped things up a little bit early here, so I wanna hear from all of you, all five of you, how would you incorporate this into maybe a current lesson, or maybe in your subject?
Kind of what my students are doing today, we're doing Nearpod, and we're talking about science of the late 1800s, so we're talking about Darwin, Louis Pasteur, and what I'm doing is I'll have a slide of notes that they'll have to take notes from, and then a discussion board over a question that I already made, another slide of notes, and then they'll take an opinion poll, another slide of notes, another discussion board. So it's switching it up about every 5 to 8 minutes, just depending on how long it takes them to do their discussions.
Okay. Ms. Bray?
Well, we're studying cellular respiration and fermentation right now. And so I thought about something a little bit different, and Becky recommended instead of like doing a question, maybe giving a word to each group. You know, they pick a word out of a bag, and then they are to discuss it, like everything they know about that word, you know. So, I don't know.
Okay. Doyle?
If I was gonna put them in groups, I'd separate the boys, the group, and put them in each group. You separate them all out, put them with people they don't wanna be with, so they can't get their little group still going. Maybe you can get something out of it because they're sitting not with the group they wanna be in. And then maybe they'll concentrate more on what we're doing in the class.
Okay, Becky?
I did it yesterday. I divided them up, numbered them off, and I gave them the 2 questions on coronavirus. What would you do to stop it coming into the United States, and what would you do once it was here?
I like that, especially with this timely.
I use a lot of news to work in with government, because right now we need a government response, and our pandemic team was fired in 2017, so I don't know what we're gonna do.
Okay. Finally, Leah?
Like what Heather says, I use Nearpod a lot. I'll even start them off with a discussion question to get them thinking, to see what they know, and then it'll get them in that mindset of what they need to do, and then break it up. Either do a discussion question or an open-ended question or a matching game, just to kind of break it up and give them something different. But it always keeps them on their toes, and they don't feel bored when I use that program. They never feel bored when they use that program.
Fantastic. So, let's wrap things up here because the bell just did ring. So, when we talk about this focused small group and purposeful talk, what we want to do is we want to remember the 4 zones. We want to make sure that we are using frequency, about 10 to 15 minutes. Then we break them up into small groups. We want to make sure that the group sizes 2 to 4, not any more than 4, because then you're going to have kids lost, and you're also going to see side conversations. Make sure that you plan out those seed questions. That takes time, but it's going to let you hit some of those higher orders of thinking. And then also make sure that you're using the power zone, especially at the beginning, because it's going to get messy. And you want to make sure that those students remain focused. Okay, so the last thing, and you can fill this out, return it back to me. I know that some of you have to get back to class, but I would like you to return this to me. The exit ticket. What is the most important part of today's presentation that you will incorporate in your class? So I know that some of you have to get going and get back to class. So thank you so much for your time. Definitely appreciate it. And I hope you have a good rest of the day.
Oh, is this the exit ticket?
Yes, that's your exit ticket.
I'll put one in this box. All right. All right, I'll see you tomorrow.